Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation or around the world. Once again, you are listening to the VMware Community's Roundtable podcast. This is podcast number 454. My name is Eric Nelson, and with me today I have my regular co-host, John White. John, it's Wednesday, October 17th. How you doing?
Doing really well, Eric. Color of the Bay report, it was a beautiful blue. I think it has something to do with the bright sunshine we're enjoying up in the Bay. I have to say, I was in the Minneapolis-St. Paul, Minnesota area the last 2 days, so I have the Color of the Lakes report, too. And they have a nice light blue, but I only saw about 8 or 9 lakes, so what's 10,000 minus 8 or 9?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's how many I know.
They do up in Wisconsin and up there in the Midwest. They do have a lot of water and a lot of lakes, and I'm happy that it's blue, and it is certainly blue here. We're having some really nice weather. A little bit of a late summer season. Got a little warm. Had to have the AC on. So yep, it's nice here in California. On the show today, we're doing power sessions in AWS with Dan Illison. Dan is a cloud solutions architect, knows a lot about cloud technologies, and in the vein of marching into VMworld Europe. We are going to have the power sessions there, so thought we'd have Dan on to talk a little bit about the power session he's doing at VMworld Europe, as well as some of the overall architecture around cloud solutions and our solutions on AWS. I've had some really great discussions with Dan around all the AWS offerings as we ramp up into AWS. We'll talk a little bit about that, and so having Dan on is going to be interesting because he has a lot of information about our strategy around cloud offerings, as well as a great power session that he's going to be at VMworld doing, I believe. So we'll talk to Dan in a minute, but we got a lot of news that's happening. So first thing we'll talk about, Corey. I think you're on the call, so let's talk a little bit about VExperts. How you doing, Corey?
I'm doing fantastic, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic as always. So some news about VExperts went on this week. We can talk a little bit about VExpert Pro. So I heard Pro got kicked off. Why don't you give us a quick summary of the Pro program in general, and we can chat a moment about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we kicked off the VExpert Pro program, and the VExpert Pro program is a collection of VExperts in region who are helping with the VExpert program, whether it's recruiting or translating content, recruiting more VExperts, translating content in local areas. So one of the things that we've recognized in the VExpert program is everything we do is in English, right? And we really don't market to those areas in non-English speaking regions very well. And so we created the VExpert program to kind of help us do that. And so yeah, that was kicked off. That was kicked off last week and by Valdecir, and really excited about the program.
Yeah, yep. I gotta say that if I look at my Twitter followers and my engagements, that people that reach out, say hello to me, and engage with me. Sometimes I don't have enough time to engage with everybody, but I would say that 70% of my discussions with people on Twitter now are international people, right? From Latin America to APJ regions to EMEA and so forth. It's a broad reach of the community as a whole, and certainly taking the VExpert program into countries, into language makes a lot of sense now, right? So excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, little bit of storyline there. I know there was some discussion on Twitter around how did you become a VExpert Pro? How we selected who was going to be a VExpert Pro. I think that we probably missed the boat with respect of explaining what a VExpert Pro actually is. It's a program to have recruiters to help people in country understand what the VExpert program is, kind of like what Val did in the LATAM region, where he's been driving the VExpert program in Brazil for the last couple of years, and we've seen a large number of VExperts come out of Brazil now because one, they know about it, two, they have someone to engage with. So the program was really looking to model that across in other countries. So good to kind of set that clarity. Corey, I know that when we first kicked off the VExpert program way back when, I worked with John, and I think I gave him a list of 25 people and said, because John was kind of hesitant of whether what was a VExpert and what would the program do and how it would work. And I just sat down with him and said, here's a list, 25 people, invite them, let's run it, right? And then we'll grow it and we'll figure out what that means. But, let's kickstart this. I kind of remember I grew up on a kind of out in the country in Ohio, and we had a pond and we had a pump that irrigated our farmland with a well, and every once in a while that well would lose prime, and you'd have to go down and fill up a gallon jug of water from the pond, dump it in the pump. There's a bolt on the top, and you'd have to dump it in the thing, and that's called priming the pump, right? And in this case for VExpert Pro, we did select a number of people that we chatted with. We talked about the program, and then we got the gallon jug of water, dumped it in the pump, and turned on the power, right? And it gurgles a lot, and it bubbles, and you have to know when to put the bolt back on, but the pump primes. And so in a very real sense, the VExpert Pro program, we primed the pump. We went out, we looked for 25, 30, I think we ended up with 40 people that we know have been doing this kind of activity in regions. We looked through APJ.
Right.
We selectively found some VExperts in APJ, and we primed the pump. And where did that list come from? I think it was the Eric list, right? Or maybe the Eric and Corey and Valdecir list. Now,
Val list.
The Val list with Eric, I definitely had meetings with him where we went through APJ people and just looked, and I talked to people at VMworld, asked them if they were interested in this. And really, these people are going to be people that help us grow the program as well as help us govern the program. So as we've reached out with Martin and others around building the app and doing stuff, we're absolutely moving into this world where, VExperts help run VExperts, right? So that's also a good thing.
Right.
The pros will become that. What are we going to do as we go forward to invite other people into this program if they're interested in working hard to help us grow the program?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you know, we're opening the VExpert applications on November 1st. And along with that, we're also opening applications for current VExperts to apply for VExpert Pro. And so we'll see those applications open up here in just about 2 weeks.
All right, good. So building that into the tool itself for sub-program applications, just like we do with NSX, vSAN, Cloud, and others, right? So understanding that this is a different criteria. This isn't just, okay, here, look, I think I'm a pro, right? This is, what are you going to do in country? What are you going to do to recruit people? How are you going to translate content? What are you doing to actually build a program in country where, if we look at VExperts in the 50 countries that are out in the globe, we might have one or two VExperts in some of the countries. So definitely by choosing, and the idea is that could we have more than one pro in a country? Absolutely. Like I could see 5 pros in a country being the base of that. Yeah. So good. I'm excited about it. I hope you are.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's the pro thing. Thanks for taking us through that. I know that hit social a little bit this week. So always on the community podcast, we're willing to talk about things that are hitting our channel. So good to chat about that, and excited about the program. And congrats to the 40 people that we managed to recruit or basically raised their hand and said, yeah, we'll help. So appreciate that. Second thing on my news list before we get to Dan, I think I have a couple, and John White, I'll touch base with you, see if you got some. Kripa, you went to Singapore to do DevOps Days in Singapore. I think it's at the Microsoft conference. How'd it go?
It went really well. It was our first time going to a purely developer conference, and we got almost 50% of people that attended to sign up for VMware Codes. It was great exposure for our community.
Yeah, nice. I think you were out there with somebody,
Reddy.
Kyle Reddy, the man himself was out there. So did you man a booth? What was that like?
Yeah, so we had a booth, and we were with a bunch of other companies. Coincidentally, we're right in between Dell EMC and Pivotal. So same within our family of brands. But yeah, we had a booth. We raffled off some Workstation and Fusion licenses, spoke to a bunch of developers, asked for ideas, and we had a great time.
Good. I think some people think that the community business is this fun, high scale, big, all VMworld kind of activities. But the truth is, I tell people you actually build a community one person at a time, right? So when you talk about booth, it's not really a booth, is it?
It's pretty much a table, half the size of the table that we're sitting at right now, just with a couple things in front of it. But yeah, it's
some
pretty,
stickers
exactly.
and you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, one-on-one individual saying hello to people, getting to know them and talking about the value prop of the community in general.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty
Right.
intimate. You're spending a lot of time with one person, which you can't really do at VMworld because there's just so many people coming through.
Right. And that's the kind of stuff that we actually like to do, right? And most
Yeah.
of the community building activity is in this land of you show up, you took the stuff in your luggage, right? Like,
I did.
the pop-up,
checked in
everything.
the pop-up
Yeah,
poster
yeah.
with a fragile sticker
Right.
on it.
I feel like one of those wandering salespeople sometimes. Like, people don't understand that is the community business. A lot
Yeah.
of building community is about showing up, dragging your suitcase along with you. Noel Greer will tell you, you got a suitcase full of T-shirts, you got stuff to give away, you've got a list to sign up, and you're just there to meet people and say hello and enable them to be part of the community ecosystem. So
Yeah, exactly.
Singapore, great. It's nice to get out to APJ and do more
Yeah.
stuff in APJ. As engineers and developers are obviously, there's a lot of activity going on in that region. So see us showing up more. We're always interested in sponsoring meetups and code events in general. It's a community program where we're sponsoring things. Good work on that. Fun times. What's the next one?
Next up is Barcelona. So
Barcelona, you're running a meetup too.
yeah, I have a
soon?
meetup next Tuesday
So
at
that's the
Prom
next
C
one.
Cafe.
Prom C
Yeah.
Cafe, you're live streaming
Live
that?
streaming it on our Facebook page.
Right.
So if
Good.
you can't make it in person,
Right.
follow us on Facebook.
Got to say that we had 4,500 downloads of the podcast last week, and
Wow.
And then another 1,000 on the Facebook live stream. So doing these things in physical presence, but also having a live streaming event allows people out there in the ecosystem to come in and watch, say hello, and have a virtual slice of pizza. So.
Yeah, that was a big thing that I got at APJ. They were all asking, do you guys live stream your events? Do you live stream podcasts?
Yep.
So.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. Well, cool. Thanks for giving us that update, and thanks for flying all the way to Singapore to do that with Kyle. Neat. VMworld Europe report. I have been seeing the sessions. We have, V Brownbagg's going to be there. Alistair's going to be there. The session reports, I think 80% of the sessions are 80 or 90% full or above. I think we have a list of maybe 20 sessions that still have room in them, right? Some power sessions
Not
in
even.
the code area.
We have about 12.
12 sessions
that
that
are
have
not
space.
completely full, yeah.
Right. And we are in the same spot that we were in VMworld last year, so I'm really excited about that because that's a really good high-volume traffic spot. Everybody gets to say hello and hang out there. We've got the blogger tables, 3 blogger tables, not 2 like US.
Nice.
We have we provisioned a bunch of Raspberry Pis again, so we'll be giving away 30 or 40 Raspberry Pis from the Makerspace sessions. The Leota guys are there. I haven't got my order for the barometric pressure sensors. I got to go track that down. But everything looks green there. Getting excited to go. And so watch out if you haven't. There's a few sessions that have openings there. And we always have standing room. In the U.S., we had a lot of, there was 20 people standing around at various times. So it should be a good event. I think we're all ready to go there. And then on the AWS side, we'll talk about AWS here. We did get our booth rendering for AWS. So if you're going to go to AWS reInvent in Vegas, you want to stop by, we've invited Alistair and V Brownbag, so he's going to be doing a call for V Brownbag sessions. So he'll be there. I think Alistair's going to fly out and be at the event, and they're going to be live streaming some of their sessions on their site, as well as doing a call for some sessions. And I think we're going to get those in AWS. The session builder, they're now in. We're sending in the list, I think, tomorrow for the ones we have, and then the community ones will go in next week. So everything's green there. We're going to have Raspberry Pis. And if you're watching the live stream, or you can go back and watch the live stream on facebook.com/VMTN community, we post a live stream here. We're going to do something the first time ever. We're going to show a graphic of the booth that's going to be at AWS reInvent. So if you're interested in looking at what our booth is going to look like, I think, Julia, are you going to switch it up now? Is it already there? Probably it's already. It's there now. You can go look at this timeline and check out what the booth is going to look like. It's a 30 by 30 foot booth, and we have concentric rings of chairs. I think there'll be like 40 40 chairs you'll be able to look at be able to see, sit. That's where the sessions are going to be happening, as well as the sensor sessions for the makerspace tables. And then they have a delineator of whiteboards with makerspace tables that are going to be there. So we got those set up. We're going to have pedestals where you can walk in and get your sensors. We're going to have a code booth in one corner and a espresso bar in the other corner. If you're looking at these renderings, the renderings never really look that appetizing because it's kind of missing it's what the rendering tool gives you to build the booth, but you can kind of get the sense of the layout, and sometimes the scale isn't exactly accurate. So understand that that's what our booth is going to look like. We're going to have, it's going to be slightly different than this, but we are busily working on it. This is draft 2. We went back and forth, and we'll get back draft 3 shortly, and we'll be there, excited with a barista making coffees and running sessions. And I think we have about 30 some sessions that are all very technical, all developer centric, a little bit developer centric, all AWS centric. So a lot of AWS subjects. We are a seller of software on Amazon these days. So it's good to understand that, and that actually transitions me before we go into our guest. I noticed John joined us live in the session. So hey, you are now no longer a voice.
Now no longer a voice. I do have a bit of news.
Oh, yeah. Well, hit us with the bit of news.
So vSphere 6.7 U1, update 1, was staged and I think went live yesterday. So the latest version of vSphere is out. The bits are available. If that's what you're waiting for, it was announced at VMworld. Now available.
Now available. Always good to get now available because... we announce this stuff. Kripa, thanks for joining. We'll see you again when you're around.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. Good. Just checking chat here. Thanks. Likes the design. Good to like the design. We'll see. It's not as cool as we want. It's going to be concrete floors. Get back to the AWS design for a second because I'm looking at chat. News on the VExpert Party. Just watching chat. News on VExpert Party. We did book a place. We invited Pat. We're taking, I think, 100+ people or more. So Corey will get that signed up. I just committed to the open bar all night kind of scenario there. So came back and it's going to cost another $3,000 or $4,000 to keep it open all night. Will be some finger foods and stuff. So we're booking it. I don't know the venue name. We will not have buses to the venue. You will have to get your cabs or get yourself to the venue. It is a nice venue. It's a restaurant. So we're taking over a restaurant somewhere. Cost me like, $13,000 or $14,000 to party with you guys again in Europe, which will be fun. All the VExperts that come are all very European centric, and we will have that party. And Corey will, I'm sure, make the announcement shortly for Reg. Let's see.
Yes, I will. Yep.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. One thing about vSphere 6.7 U1, it will break Veeam backup. If you have Veeam in your environment, pay attention before you update.
Yes. So this is always a key with a new release of hypervisor. You want to check the chain of things that depend on specific hypervisor versions. So if you have a backup software, if you have replication software, if you have disaster recovery software, you want to make sure that all of that works with the new version before you upgrade. But you can always, set up a lab and kind of lab out those upgrades ahead of time anyway. That's always recommended.
All right. Well, we're going to get to our guest now as we've had a great news session. So on the show, again, I'll just remind everybody, we have Dan Ellison. Dan, I always mess up people's last names. It's the thing I do. So if you want to correct me on the name, you are Cloud Solutions Architect. Welcome to the VMware Community Roundtable podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks very much for having me on today.
No problem. Looking forward to it. So first thing we always do for new, I think this is the first time on the show, so we always ask, who are you, how long you've been working in the industry, where have you been, and then we'll get into what you do here. So why don't you give a little bit of an elevator pitch. Who are you and what do you do?
Who am I and what do I do? Well, so I work in the public cloud specific solutions group here at VMware. So it is an interesting place. It is an interesting group to be a part of at a company like VMware. So we run around and we deal in all things AWS, Azure, and Google Compute specifically these days, and specifically figuring out not only how our customers and sometimes different groups within our customers are interacting with those environments, but what they're trying to do and how some things that we make here at VMware or that we are in the process of making here at VMware may help them through various parts of their journey. So it is an interesting role to have.
Great. And what did you do before you came to VMware? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
So this is actually my second job at VMware.
All right.
So my second job at VMware, I got here in 2013 on the heels of the Nicira Networks acquisition. I was fortunate enough to be an early member of the sales engineering team in the network and security business unit. Worked with some of the guys on the early days of NSX from before the time we actually announced and launched the project up until around a year and a half ago when I transitioned over to this role. And so before that, I was at a tiny little outfit called Cisco Systems for about 7 years or so as a service provider networking person, technologist over there. So kind of how I've made my way.
Now, when you got to VMware, were you surprised to find out that we weren't just all networking? I'm sure that Nicira, you were all networking, and then we bought you, and probably somebody told you that we were just all networking. And then you got here, and you're like, wait, what's going on?
No, it was actually kind of the opposite experience. I got a call from someone from VMware, and I said, "Me? Why? Why do you guys want to talk to me?"
Right, exactly.
It took about 15 minutes, I think, before we understood each other. So it was good.
Good. All right. So you've been here. How long? I missed how many years now? Like 3 years now?
5? 2013?
5?
No, I've been here just over 5 years now. Yeah, it would have been 5 years in the spring.
I can't believe we've had Nicira for 5 years. That's crazy, right? I guess we really didn't get Nicira out as a product for like 2 years. So, and then VExperts managed to get it like somewhere around 2.5 years. So that makes sense. All right. So now you've transitioned to a new role, which is you're doing marketing for cloud oriented stuff, and that's interesting in its own right. Is most of the stuff that you're managing, a multi cloud environment like AWS and Azure and other things. Where do you spend your time? In this space.
Yeah. So me specifically, I spend a lot of time in the Kubernetes and kind of cloud native app container ecosystem. That's kind of become my personal specialty on the team. I have another colleague who I'm sure some people listening to the podcast will be familiar with, Mr. Sean Odell, who spends a little more time on the cloud operations side of what we do, and then we work with a gentleman named Bill Shetty, who is our third team member and sort of player coach, if you will.
Nice.
So we mix it around a little bit, but we do deal in all the major clouds. I mean, obviously, Amazon Web Services takes up a lot of our time because of their market share and their presence, especially here in North America. But we are spending, an increasing amount of time in Azure, an increasing amount of time with the folks from Google as time goes along here. So I imagine it will settle into a little more of an equitable split, I think, as we go forward over time.
Well, before we get into your power session, you are doing a power session at VMworld, right? I am accurate on that data point.
I believe I am. Yes, I'll have another one. I had a couple in Las Vegas, and I'll have another one here in Barcelona.
All right, great. So, but before we get into
into
where flying to Europe and to do your power session, I forget what the question was going to be before we got to that. But we'll let that one go and just and move on. So you are doing a power session. You did power sessions at US, and maybe we should talk a little bit about Kubernetes, all right, and where we are from a product perspective. I think we had a guest on to talk about KVE and Kubernetes,
right.
Yeah.
PKS
and I think it's KVE, which is our cloud-based Kubernetes offering as a service. Where are you with respect to Kubernetes from an industry perspective? You can just give us a summary of where you were, and I guess you've transitioned into this. And how did you transition into this? And where do you think we are? And then we can transition to what your power session is.
Yeah. So VMware, I think we're maybe further into the Kubernetes ecosystem than a lot of people would think initially. So obviously we have two offerings. We have the self-managed offering in PKS, and then we have the managed service, cloud service model with VMware Kubernetes Engine, or VKE. So I work very closely with the VKE team because their delivery and operations model fits very closely with what my team does. We have a fairly unique service in that regard because, most of the other cloud providers have a Kubernetes-based service. Whether you're at Azure, Amazon, or Google, they all have one, and they're all generally something KE or something KS, depending on the particular cloud provider. But the way those tend to work is the providers will manage the core infrastructure of the cluster, so they'll manage what are called the master nodes. But generally, they'll deploy the worker nodes, or the actual resources and machines where all the Kubernetes containers get deployed. They'll deploy those into the individual customer's account. And if you look at kind of how the responsibility model works, that means that fundamentally, if something happens to one of those worker nodes where all of your containers live, you're sort of left to fend for yourself to a certain degree as an end user or as a consumer of that service. And they make sure that the control plane endpoint is there so that you can access your cluster and add resources to it and things like that. With VKE, we actually run a fully managed service. So we're managing both the master nodes as well as the worker nodes. So if you have a worker node failure, we are responsible as the service owner for bringing that back up, making sure all of your workloads that were running on it at the time come back up in a reasonably predictable way, and that you have a little more assurance around that. So it is a little bit of a different model. And what we're finding with some enterprise customers, especially ones that are earlier, let's say, in their journey with containers and Kubernetes, they like the security, and they like the knowledge that we are managing the whole service for them and not part of it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that is actually quite a large differentiation. The whole idea of going in and getting a managed service is that somebody else is managing it. And to have the idea that you're paying for managed service, but you're still responsible for the health and care and feeding of part of the service seems like kind of a big gap if that's what you're expecting. So you're saying that the VMware version of
it is interesting that way. The cloud providers would tell you that what they run is not a fully managed service. You know what I mean? They would call it a cloud service or an infrastructure service or something, and so they make the differentiation that way. We identified a place where we could be different, and so we went down that path. We've also built the service to be multi-cloud capable off the bat. So right now the regions we're running are fundamentally Amazon regions, but we will be adding Azure regions here in the future to give us a little more diversity of cloud regions. And those will function exactly the same from a Kubernetes perspective as our Amazon-backed regions would.
Got it. That's a big difference too, because I think that some people, would question, what is there an advantage to, not using the specific cloud provider version, since they maybe know their service best, right? But what we're trying to do is provide like a multi-cloud, the ability to move from region to region, from provider to provider, and still have not have to change a whole lot.
All right.
Nothing at all, actually. You have to change a region identifier. So it's pretty straightforward from that perspective.
So let's talk about the customer dynamic for a little bit. I don't know if you get exposure to customers when as part of your role, but if you do, then one of the things that I get into is how much of the engagements are we engaging with current IT customers, right, with data centers that are looking to expand their role versus coming in from a DevOps or a developer perspective and working with developer teams that are actually looking at deploying next gen apps, right? And so how much of this is layering into existing vSphere, VMware customers and data centers versus how much is your interaction working with, people that are just interested in having Kubernetes as a service, and they're just building next gen apps, and where's the overlap there? Is there?
So there is an overlap, and it's been an interesting, it's been kind of an interesting dynamic to navigate as we've gone through. When we started out, obviously, and I do interact quite a bit with customers, so I'm a former sales engineer, so some old habits die hard. As we started out, right, a lot of our initial customer discussions and initial relationships were coming on the back of existing relationships the company had, right, and that tends to be, more of a VMware and vSphere data center administrator audience. We've started there, and what we've heard from some of those folks is, hey, my development teams that I work with internally are telling me I need to be able to support a Kubernetes offering or a Kubernetes infrastructure for them going forward, or as sometimes has been the case, my executives are telling me that because my developers are spending, some obscene amount of money in the public cloud, and I need to be able to support this. And so, how can you guys help me figure out how I can, support that and not have to completely reinvent the wheel from, where I'm coming from and the tools I currently use? We certainly had that conversation and continue to have it to this day. But I think as time has gone on, either through, my team being out at industry events and things and some developer events, or even through internal introductions, I guess, within some of our customer organizations, we've started to talk to actually some of the development teams and lines of businesses themselves at our customers. And so they have an interesting, take on what can often be the same set of requirements, but, viewed through a different lens and a different perspective. And what I've found from talking to them is that oftentimes the line of business or the development group, in a lot of ways, they don't always necessarily care, where their Kubernetes clusters run or some of those things. They just want access to the tools that they feel they need, which, is a Kubernetes cluster and access to whatever, external services, database services, queuing services, and other things that they need. And as long as they can get that through our service, they're amenable to it. And so, then it becomes an interesting balance of kind of balancing the wants and desires of those two groups, because, at the end of the day, they're fundamentally trying to deliver the same thing. I mean, at the end of the day, they're both trying to work together to deliver an application that has some value to the organization they work for. They just have different skill sets and a little bit of a different lens at times on what the priorities are to get there. But fundamentally, it's the same end goal, I think.
Yeah, it's that balancing act. It's interesting. Once a team is interested in that tool, right, the platform, they've decided that what they want to consume is Kubernetes, as you pointed out. Probably the first iteration in that is a developer taking on managing maybe a small local cluster or installation, and they hack it together, get it working. Hey, the output is great, but then nobody on that team actually wants to own running that service, right? So then that's when you maybe go and consume it in public cloud, or maybe alternatively somebody's done it before somewhere else, and so they say, why don't we just consume the public cloud version as a pilot? And again, they like the platform that they get, but then comes scaling, and scaling is always the problem, right? And adopting it as a corporate standard, so it's really interesting. I'm interested in hearing maybe the kinds of problems that these customers are trying to solve.
problems they're trying to solve. I think they break down fundamentally along a couple main lines, right? There's almost always there's a speed or agility problem, right? In that wherever you are today is not quite fast enough, or not as fast as it should be. And so there's always how can we derive a little more efficiency here? How can we get a little faster and a little more agile in terms of what we're doing, and whether that's actually developing or deploying or scaling, that's all an agility conversation in my mind. But the second one that I think is more interesting, and maybe more interesting to us at VMware as a company, is Kubernetes can be a mechanism for portability. Because if you look at what you get in Kubernetes, you get a predictable abstraction over essentially any infrastructure, and even infrastructure you don't control at all.
Right.
So between that and container runtimes like Docker, you begin to get to a very portable place where I could feasibly, as long as I have a matching Kubernetes API version in on one cluster in one environment and on a second cluster in a different environment, I get to the point where I could basically pick up my container definition and run it again, on premises and in the public cloud, in our managed service and, somewhere else. And so that I think is very interesting. And when you look at, even the offerings we have in terms of VKE and PKS, the potential to, for example, get started with Kubernetes in a managed service in the cloud, and then as I build up my competency internally, deploy PKS on premises and, either move some of those applications and runtimes that I had running in the managed service back, or run replicas and other things in these multiple environments. You get to a very flexible, very fungible place with your resources, which I think is a very interesting and very desirable thing for a lot of the customers that I'm out talking to right now. And ultimately, if we put them in that place where they can be very flexible, they can then decide over time and as their needs change, where they need to be. Today they may need to be public cloud heavy. Tomorrow they may have a reason to be more on premises heavy, and that may even flop again, further on down the line. So I think the packaging element and the flexibility that comes with it is maybe a second or third order problem. It doesn't show up for everybody right away, but I think the longer they use it, the more that tends to find its way to the forefront.
It's interesting because it's a very analogous advantage to what the hypervisor actually provides. That portability, the flexibility, slicing of resources, and abstraction, and not being dependent on a specific environment.
Okay. All right, so we're going to transition a little bit because I got other things to talk about here, so especially with Dan. First, but before we do kind of high-level conversation on AWS, I want to touch base on the session that I see in Schedule Builder for Europe, which I got you on two sessions. One is Code 5615E, and that one is seamless integration between AWS services and VMware Kubernetes engine. So do you want to do just a quick summary of what you're going to be talking about when in that session?
Teaser. Tease me.
Tease us.
Right. So that's actually it's a great session, right? So I really like it because I get to talk about not just VMware Kubernetes engine, which I'm obviously very excited about and very high on, but how, because we're fundamentally running on top of Amazon regions right now, how I can bridge that environment to the native Amazon services that live out there. So looking at things like, hey, I have a Kubernetes application running, but I want to run my database in RDS. I want to take advantage of Amazon's simple notification system or the simple queuing system to do some message passing to other things. Maybe I want to integrate a Lambda function as a triggered event to go and do something outside of my Kubernetes cluster, right? So it's really about extending the environment, and so we'll talk about what the approach is to doing that with the tools we have available in the service, and we'll use one of our kind of sample demo app applications to show some of those functions against a couple different services.
Are you going to talk about using the services natively, like directly, using consuming their APIs directly versus writing your own abstraction layer for the API, so it's a little bit more portable from provider to provider?
Yeah, so the way I do it in my app, I'm actually calling the APIs directly off of my Amazon account credentials. There's also a couple things we can do in Kubernetes to actually map an endpoint for an external service. So I can essentially map my RDS database endpoint and reference it in my application as RDS. And then that, of course, gets translated to the endpoint. So we kind of do it in a couple different ways. Cool.
Nice session. Code 5615. Not sure what the availability is. I know a lot of these guys have started to fill up, but I think there's some space in some of the Kubernetes ones in general. So hopefully yours is still bookable. It says I can schedule it, so I think I still can. It says I'm not scheduled yet there, but don't know add to schedule. So I think it's good. Another one I have you listed on. You're doing a joint one with Bill, I think, Bill Shetty, which is use cloud services to deploy and maintain apps in a multi-cloud environment. So looks like a lot of the same stuff, but we have tools and things you can be using along with everything. So it looks like a nice session. That's an hour-long session versus your other one is only half an hour. So it looks like you'll be drilling down into components that you can be using to manage your apps in a multi-cloud environment.
Multi-cloud is interesting. Are you going to be showing an app that's doing more than one public cloud?
Yeah, so from a multi-cloud context, it's interesting, right? Because even when you say multi-cloud, everybody goes, oh, okay, so you're going to do Amazon and Azure or Amazon and Google or something like that. And we do that. But there's, kind of another permutation to that, I think, right? Because we have, let's say, the native Amazon experience as well as the VMware hybrid cloud experience, right? So if we have the VMware hybrid cloud running on SDDC and VMware cloud on AWS, we think of that as a hybrid cloud stack. Well, if I'm also running a native Amazon stack alongside it, and I want to, think about and use some of the same tooling against both of those environments, that becomes a multi-cloud story fundamentally.
Definitely.
So, we look at it from that perspective. This session with Bill and I, we kind of break it into two pieces. We look at what we think of as day zero activities, so provisioning, deploying, these sorts of activities, and we spend a little bit of time on that, both in a compute instance or VM-backed frame of view, as well as Kubernetes, and then we have a cloud operations section where we look at some of our cloud operations tools, log intelligence, Wavefront, some of these sort of things for, okay, now you've got your apps out there. How do you aggregate information from them and be able to look at kind of the overall health of your apps that may be touching a couple of different environments?
Very cool.
Nice session. All right, so we have maybe 10 or 12 minutes left here. Last thing I want to touch on, and I know you're here, and I've had some really good conversation with you and Bill around this, is the trend that's happening with IT practitioners. I mean, we're a community podcast, so it's good to touch base with this. Like, where there is this idea that VMware is becoming a bookseller on cloud environments, i.e., you say, if you look at AWS, you look at Amazon as a whole, right? Amazon is there to sell things, right? And they've built a compute framework to sell things, right? Like just like they have a shipping framework to sell things, they have a compute framework, and Amazon doesn't really care what they sell. They'll sell everything that anybody has, right? Mm-hmm. And I see VMware transitioning from a pure infrastructure in your data center to infrastructure at the book shipper, right? Or what we call AWS, right? Which is a transition that everybody has to kind of understand in the compute business, is that there is not a giant bookseller that's selling books, which is really compute services. And VMware has actually got some really good solutions in that. And we all have to make that transition. And Dan and Bill, you guys are both in the forefront of dealing with the cloud apps that VMware is selling on AWS, right? So, and just to tick off a few, we got VMC on AWS, we got VKE, we got cloud security and compliance. We have NSXT, we have Wavefront, we have SRM, Horizon, and then we actually have some Amazon products that we sell, VMware sells, whether it be RDS or Greengrass, right? So in a real sense, we're transitioning into kind of a portfolio of products that are on AWS, that are available on AWS that might not have anything to do with the plumbing or the hardware, right? That we're selling, and you wouldn't have to necessarily run any of these things on vSphere, on top of vSphere, right? These are kind of products that you can build. And now we didn't even talk about Cloud Health, right? And the fact that we've acquired a management app like Cloud Health that really looks at the business aspects of running your stuff on AWS.
Or previous acquisition, Cloud Choreo.
Right. So tying it back to Dan, right? I know you guys support all of these. You specialize in Kubernetes, but you and Bill in general have some insight around this notion that VMware as a business needs to transition into these roles, and our IT practitioners need to understand that we actually sell things that have nothing to do with vSphere any longer, right? Like that there's products that just run on AWS that provide you function. How much of your marketing activities or engagement are with people that aren't really running vSphere, right? Do you get, are you into that space? And what are your challenges when you're kind of working with the IT practitioners and stakeholders around this transition? Or do you even get into that? So I'll be quiet now and let Dan comment.
No, we do. Our little team, Bill, myself, Sean, and then we have a couple other gentlemen that have joined the team here in the last year or so. So we've got Tim Davis, who I'm sure some of you know down in Texas, and then a gentleman named Prabhu Bharati up in the New York City area.
Who's Tim Davis? Never heard of that. Never heard that name. That guy must be a loser. No, Tim is a great community guy. Yeah,
he seems all right so far.
Yeah,
we'll see how it goes. But no, so it leads to a lot of very interesting discussions that we have among ourselves, and usually are kicked off by our recapping something one of us talked about with a customer recently, because we do end up in the middle of all of it. I mean, now I think we're getting to a point where we've started to be out at events where, yes, I've now talked to a couple customers that have never purchased a VMware product, full stop. They've never purchased anything with a VMware logo on it. And now we're having a conversation about, Kubernetes and metrics monitoring with Wavefront and some of that stuff, because it's a very, they are very developer-centric or are a development group themselves, and that's what they care about. And at the same time, Sean, myself, Tim, right, we've all been around the company for a little while, and so, we're also having conversations with our previous relationships, both inside the company and with our old customers, who are saying, hey, I'm getting asked to do this new thing, I'm getting asked to make this transition, how do I do this? I get calls from old customers of mine that say, yeah, this thing is great, but I don't want to upgrade it and run it myself anymore. Do you guys sell it as a service yet? And then what does that look like, and what are the dynamics involved in that? So, we sit right in the middle of that kind of nexus of things and sort of get pulled a little bit in all of the directions. But, fundamentally what it says to me is that we no longer live in the world of a few years ago where basically, we sold packaged software that people then took, installed, and managed themselves to do whatever it was they were trying to do. The operate model and the consumption model is not so unified anymore. It's a little bit all over the place. And so, we as a company need to figure out, how do we help people that have these different needs and these different ways they want to interact with us and our products. And to your point, that may mean, selling some of this stuff through Amazon, running it on Amazon, running it both on Amazon and in another environment. right now that kind of means the whole set of things. And one of the really fun parts about my job is trying to figure out how to navigate that stuff, which leads me to my next point, which is it is also at times one of the most frustrating parts of my job because at times there are no right answers to that, right? And so that both makes a problem really fun and interesting, as well as at times pretty frustrating when you're trying to navigate it. So it's good. It is good, but it's an interesting inflection point we find ourselves at these days.
Right. And I know that, we're making billion-dollar investment bets, right? VMware is, right? And it gets into some interesting, community conversations around what's our brand, right? So we call them VExperts. We're VExperts. We created the VExpert brand, right? But as we move forward, how much VE is going to be in the VExpert program? Or as a practitioner, I now have additional products that are interesting to me that I can actually, engage with, blog about, talk about in our ecosystem. And I suppose to some degree you learn about it when a customer or your current employer actually starts using that product. But some VExperts are just engaged, and we have VExpert, we have VMware Code, right? So these brands represent kind of VMware 2, 4, 5 years ago, right? As we're starting to acquire new products in cloud native spaces, or I use native in the cloud, the cloud, right? Pure cloud plays, whether it be Cloud Health or others. Where does that leave the practitioner, right? Where does it leave our brands? And when we go forward, and we're going to be in AWS, and Dan, I think you're going to be there as well. Do we call it VMware Code? Do we call it code? And when people don't even know that it's actually VMware, they're actually using Wavefront, right? Where do we lead, and what does it mean to be a community member in this ecosystem? So I think there's some interesting questions here around, taking the community, and we are showing up at AWS. We are bringing Alistair Cook and V Brownbag, and we are going to be code centric, right? What does it mean for us as a community to transition from just a V everything to a everything, right? And software as a service and software infrastructure management, which might not have anything to do with V. Right. So interesting comments. I think that's less of a question for you, Dan, and more of a I'm excited to go to AWS and kind of work some of this stuff out and offer up community opportunities to shine in this area, right? Which is why we're bringing V Brownbag there, which is why we have a booth there, which is why we're spending $200K to get there and to do everything we do at a conference that we don't even own. Right. So interesting.
Well, it's the continuing evolution of the IT operations role, right? Because it certainly what it is today isn't what it was 10 years ago, and it isn't what it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago.
Right.
It's constantly changing.
Right. And I want to take back to like John Troyer and others, right, and Michelle Laverick and others, and get their opinion on, hey, as we move forward with these products and these offerings, and there's guys like Dan out here that are doing multi-cloud, right, and look at our V position and go, that scratched their head. Now, I'm sure Dan won't say that in a public podcast, but possibly I've had a couple coffees with Bill and Dan where we've had that conversation, right, of what does it mean to have the community engaged in these places, and how V-centric are we versus customers and, the wave of people that are showing up on AWS. It's a mixed bag for sure. So,
well, there's also the dilemma of, following versus leading. Right. Are we following where the market is going, or are we trying to lead the market in a way that we think is beneficial to the market?
Right. Now, in the and we'll loop back to Dan for some final closing comments. But in my take, you also have to realize these are fun challenges. They're interesting to do, and you don't have to outrun the bear, right? You just have to outrun your competitors that are also running from the bear. And I think we really are on top of this. I think if I look at VMware and how we transitioned off of vSphere into multi-domain, and then I look at how we're transitioning into the whole cloud thing, I'm like, wow. We have our challenges and things we have to work on. But if I look at how well we're doing compared to anybody else, I'm like amazed that we're actually transitioning. We have a portfolio of products, we have people, we have experts, and we're getting there. And so I think we're running faster than anyone else. There's a lot of people behind us that will get eaten by the bear. Right. So
very true.
So Dan, you're going to be at AWS reInvent, I take it, and I think we might have a session for you at the booth. I haven't looked at the list to know for sure, but I know that we've been engaged with you guys, and you've given us a great list of sessions. Anything else you want to close off with regard to VMworld or AWS? Are you going to be there at AWS reInvent?
Yes, and yes. And then about 2 weeks later, I turn around and go to KubeCon. So I will be I will be all over the Western Hemisphere conference scene for the next couple months. But look, I think it's a really interesting time, not just for us as a company, but for the industry. Right, there are a lot of changes going on, and I think what's been really fun to watch, if I can comment a little bit on some of the community stuff. I look at it growing what we all do overall. I mean, if anything, it doesn't diminish or put away any of the V stuff. I think it grows the overall footprint of what people are looking at and what we all have to do and care about. So I look at it as an expansion more than anything. Now, that doesn't come without some level of stress, I know, because it's just more stuff that everybody has to know and keep track of. But, that's what people like me get to go run around and play with some of the new things, and hopefully we can help make that a little easier for some other folks that maybe don't have the cycles to spend on it. But, I think overall the world gets a little bigger for all of us, and I think on net that's probably generally a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a lot of fun, right?
Totally agree. Yeah. If it was static, it wouldn't be fun, right?
No, right, exactly. And KubeCon. All right, we're gonna have to put that on my list. Make sure that we do some coverage on that. And we'll see you in Europe. And we'll see you at AWS. And as always, thanks for coming on the show and sharing. We are spending a little bit more time on AWS the next month because we are going to reInvent. We have a booth and a coffee machine, espresso machine. Alistair Cook's going to be there. V Brown Bag. If you got an idea around an AWS session, go talk to Alistair. Get in the queue. We don't have we have a limited number of sessions. We're going to be there 4 days, but reInvent is an interesting spot. Plus, we have some product ones we're doing. So only a handful of community sessions, maybe 6 to 10, right? So depending on what we see come in. But Alistair's doing a call for those, I think, later today in Australian time. So look for him if you got one. Dan, how do you say your last name? Ilson. Dan Ilson. Senior Cloud Architect. Thanks for coming on the show and sharing. And we're at the end of the day. We'll transition to the V Barbecue report. I know that Corey Romero has a one. I'll do mine first. Got to do a shout out to Rolando Cole. Rolando Cole tweeted out. He's at ROLMK. If you go take a look at that, he tweeted out an amazing Argentinian barbecue. And I tell you, just looking at the rack of food there. I didn't get it over to the live stream, so you won't be able to see it. But that makes me hungry just looking at that.
Yikes.
And if you've been to the Argentinian, pay $30 and get all the meat you can eat. Your prostate thanks you for that because it is a lot of meat and it's smoky and good. Corey Romero, if you're still on the call, I know you did some barbecuing this week.
Yeah, I did. I actually made a Guinness burger, and Guinness, I'm referring to the alcoholic beer Guinness, and it was one of the most tasty burgers I've ever had. Ooh. And the way I cooked it was real simple. You just take a 1 can of Guinness, just the regular black stout, and you pour that into a cooking pot and add 2 tablespoons of cane sugar and a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce, and you cook that down until it becomes almost like cough syrup thick, real thick, and it's not very much, what's left after the water and alcohol and everything else is cooked out. And then what you do is about three quarters of the way when the burger's done, you just take one of the brush, a barbecue brush, and you brush the top twice, brush the bottom twice with the Guinness sauce, and then you add cheese, put it in your burger. It is amazing. Ooh. One of the best burgers I've ever had.
Very interesting. And I'm sorry, I forgot who tweeted this at me, but somebody sent me an idea for a smoky honey barbecue sauce. And they said, and of course I replied, oh yeah, that's right, because Eric is putting the API in Apiary.
Yeah.
I'll get some honey from him, and then we'll work on a smoky honey.
Nice. We got that. Right. I've been selling my honey.
I'm going to try
Go for it, Corey.
Oh, I was just going to say I'm going to try the Guinness sauce on pork baby back ribs soon.
All right. If we go any longer, we're going to have to call this the Community Barbecue Podcast.
That's
so
true, yeah.
We're going to let it go at that. We're at the top of the hour. Dan, thanks a lot for being here. Everybody else, have a great week. We will be here again next week talking about the shows.
Looking forward to it.
We will hit the big
Thank you,
stop
guys.
record button now. Thanks, Dan. Yep, awesome.
Recording paused.
Recording paused. Good. Nice show.